and I get the privilege of introducing our panel today. My name is Janet Spink. I'm the current archivist for the Mid-Atlantic region. And first I'll introduce you to Dr. Jeannie Ferentz. She is currently the director of the program at Elizabethtown University. And she's also on the editorial board for Music Therapy Perspectives. And your research currently is in neurobiology of trauma. Is that correct? All right. Next we have Dr. Yoka Bratt, who is an associate professor at Drexel University. She is the editor-in-chief of the Nordic Journal of Music Therapy, and her research currently is federally funded and is centered on chronic illness and chronic pain. Good morning. And then we have Dr. Tony Meadows. He's a Shenandoah.
I can't believe you've memorized all of this. It's amazing.
I know, it's impressive.
Did you hear what she said? There's nothing on your bio page,
Yeah,
so she couldn't memorize
You
anything.
didn't write anything, but you can introduce yourself.
It's all done so well.
It was done so well.
I'm wanted by the FBI. So, yeah, I'm the director of music therapy at Shenandoah University.
I mean, I'm probably what, the senior member in terms of the group? Yes. Yep. So, because we were talking last night actually at dinner, I asked everybody, what was everybody else doing in 75? And they said, they were rolling around in cribs or not even a glimmer in their parents' eyes yet. And that's when I got done with my undergraduate training. You got done in 77, yeah. So, there were 9 schools in the United States at that time in music therapy. I think we were considered kind of the second wave of people kind of going through training. So I studied with Unkerfer, which was phenomenal. And I think it set the stage for a lot of ability to be able to ask questions. At the time, there was one psych of music book, Lundin, and that was what we knew and had. Dale Bartlett was who taught. He had written chapters for both the first and second edition of the Hodges book. And I remember his office was just piles of folders and papers because he was compiling all the stuff he wrote on the physiological responses. And that was, I think, our first kind of observational inquiry into music therapy and how it was really kind of influencing people per se. And he was the one that ran. We actually did small studies and ran stats, and I remember getting the bug even back then in terms of research and just the numbers. And to me, it's like playing like a puzzle and a game of trying to figure out things by what your question is, and then what's the best way to kind of measure that, and how do you analyze, and how do you make inferences, and how do you kind of go from there? And I caught the bug a long time ago.
So I came to the U.S. to study music therapy at Temple University, and I had done a little bit of one music therapy course in Belgium, but there was no training program there at that time, so I was able to get a Fulbright scholarship, came here, and although I originally, when I was on the plane, and actually when I arrived at Temple University, I greatly regretted my decision because it was in a very depressed area that was much different than what it is today. I mean, it's still a depressed area, but Temple has done a lot to improve it. And culture shock times 100. It's like, I was coming from a small village, very protected, and so, but I am so happy I stayed and studied with Ken and Cheryl. And I was always very interested from the get-go in research as well. Went back to Belgium, worked as a music therapist, and there decided I really want to be doing research. But the interesting thing is I came back, did my PhD, and the only model that I had seen as a PhD student was you get your PhD and you get a faculty position. And then I saw most faculty with heavy teaching loads. And that was my first position at Montclair. I was teaching 5 courses a semester, was the director of the program, was responsible for clinical placement, so there was no time to breathe. And after about 5 years, I was like, this is not quite what I want to be doing. I want to be doing research. But at that moment, didn't quite know the path forward. And I guess we'll talk more about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But so I've early on wanted to be on that research path and be involved with research.
And I think mine was actually not dissimilar now, listening to you tell it. I was working clinically. I trained in Australia. I was working clinically in a school for kids with multi-disabilities, and I got to the point in my clinical work where something just wasn't working right for me. And then came to the States and studied at Temple as well with Brusha. And it was at that time in the way that he taught that just some light went off inside, I think. And all of a sudden I started to see what I was doing differently, and I wanted to understand that more. And so I think the very first study that I did actually was self-inquiry. It was a qualitative research project. That was in 1992. And all of a sudden I understood that I could do something that helped me understand something better, and that was really relevant to what I was doing every day, and that was really important to me.
Mm-hmm. Great. And that's kind of a little bit about the past. Let's talk a little bit about the present, maybe about research. Is there a research committee or something that's involved with that, or?
About our present research
Yeah,
activities?
present.
So I am presently at Drexel University, and I'm very lucky to be in a research faculty position there, so I get to spend a lot of my time doing research. So right now I am doing 2 NIH-funded studies and some other studies. But I'm in the midst of lots of grant-funded research and writing grants and publishing the results of the grants, and then training the next generation of scholars and researchers. And that actually, yesterday somebody asked me, how do you keep going? How do you do it all? What drives you? And I started answering, and he said, but why? Why do you do it? And I said, I think it's twofold. It's the excitement of being able to do impactful research or large research studies with different research teams, so the excitement of team science and doing it together with other people, and at the same time, because of having these several studies going, being able to give the opportunity to my PhD students to really get involved in research. So Clarissa is a study coordinator of an NEA-funded study that we're doing at 11th Street. So she gets an awesome experience of actually coordinating a whole study. And if I wouldn't have that funded research, my students wouldn't have the opportunity to do that. And for me to see your growth, for example, from doing small research tasks to being timid as a research coordinator to now blossoming and just owning it, and that is just really exciting to be able to mentor people into those roles and hopefully into independent research roles of their own. So that's kind of me. And right now, so I served on the research committee for many years, but this year, since 2012, and this year I stepped down because I just need to make decisions for my own mental health and taking some stuff off my plate. But that we can talk more about the research committee later. But that has been wonderful.
I'm actually in one of those positions still that Yoko talked about, which is running the program and having lots of students. And I've chose to kind of go the way of even more so mentoring and have found ways to build in involving research throughout the curriculum as far as developing the skills even from first years through seniors. And the students being able to, through their courses, then come up with their ideas for studies. And I found that that's been really motivating, and they've picked some incredible ideas that they actually look at. And they come up with them as a group. And being able to mentor that way, as well as lots of honors projects. I've got 4 actually this year, in addition to what's going on in class. And I see the changes that happen even as you were talking about, as we walk through. So we walk through, learn something, they go do it, walk through, learn something. And I probably teach statistics just a little bit differently in terms of kind of hands-on and a lot of manipulatives and scenarios, and the room is rather messy at the end of class a lot of times, but I think as they do now, then their honors projects, if they choose to do that, I see a whole new kind of independence where they're kind of taking over, and they're even identifying, statistics and going off and running them and interpreting. And like you said, I love seeing them get really excited about doing it and what they learn, and hopefully then how they talk about it when they come back as master's students or going into other classes, being able to interpret the literature. They said, today in a group we were reading studies, and I was the only one that could tell what was going on in the results section to the rest of the group. And I think that's what probably feeds me as an educator right now.
What was the question, Mark?
It was kind of the current, how you use research maybe currently, what the current status is for maybe what you do at your school, your program.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's interesting, as I was thinking about it, what I'm doing now actually is actually connected to what my experience was. So in our master's degree program, when I came to Shenandoah, we revised the program so that master's students are doing data collection projects. Mm-hmm. And that my experience of that is that it's really actually hard to do it in a master's degree program, and that partly because of time and partly because there's a lot of stuff that students need to know to be able to do that well. Mm-hmm. And that so I've tried to do that to work with students, and so there's a curriculum part to it, but I think that what I'm learning is that if students take a clinical question that's meaningful to them, then and that it has a direct impact on their clinical work, mm-hmm. then they're really engaged in research. Mm-hmm. And that I think that I'm learning that's when students are able to see it and experience it through living it, then they develop a really deep understanding of not just their clinical work. I think it gets better, but they really get what it means to be a researcher, and they feel more comfortable in that role. But it's really, at the same time, you can only at the master's degree level, you can only really learn one thing, just one, and it's one little thing in the big scheme of becoming a researcher or whatever that means. But for students, they feel a sense of competence in being able to do this thing that well. So we've placed an emphasis on helping students move a master's project through to publication. Mm-hmm. And getting them to go through. So for us, the learning experience is not just in the research, but actually submitting it for publication and getting the reviews back and dealing with the reviewer comments and taking it all the way through to hopefully to acceptance. And that's that's something that I didn't think about as being important to learn as a student. That review comments that's a whole thing. And it's hard for students to especially when they're really invested in something. So that's enough.
Yeah. If there's anyone else has anything to offer or want to, have a question, feel free anytime. But I could ask how's research changed over the years since you've all been doing it? Has there been changes in research?
We actually, I have to laugh because we had received some potential questions beforehand, and that was one of the questions. And yesterday I see Tony and I was like, my goodness, how could we even begin to answer that? And I feel like we need to do 5 research studies in order to answer that properly. But, one thing that I've seen change, though, I think, and maybe it's just because I'm in a different environment now, in a school of nursing and health professions and surrounded by researchers, but I do get a sense when I was a student there was much more a dichotomy between quantitative and qualitative research, and kind of a lot of wasted time fighting, and qualitative researchers saying that quantitative research was reductionistic and therefore it was no good, and quantitative researchers saying qualitative research couldn't lead to anything meaningful in terms of generalizable results, so why would you even consider it? And I always found it such a waste of time for that to happen, or at least as I was growing as a scholar. And it was really only by being in a different environment, outside of music therapy, in a school of nursing and health professions, and being surrounded by researchers, that I saw, I learned, especially from nurse researchers, oh yeah, we've been there, we've done that too, but that was like 20 years ago. We moved on from that. Now we understand both are important and are necessary. And then I think also with the growing body of research and mixed methods research, I think the two have come together better. And for me right now, I think the research climate is just much more collaborative, and I think there's more of respect for all kind of research, and not just respect, but truly valuing of all kind of research. And I don't think everybody is there yet, but I've seen that as an important movement, at least the past maybe 5 years, maybe not even 10 years. I mean, do you agree?
Between 5 and 10, I would say.
Yeah. And it's much more pleasant coming to conferences. It's much more pleasant reading publications.
Much more productive.
It's much more reflective rather than defensive. And I think it's really important also for the future training of our students, because I know when I was trained, when I arrived at Temple, I was kind of assigned to Cheryl, and so therefore I was going to do quantitative research. I mean, that was not even a question, right? If I see what we're doing with our students now, it's not, we don't box students in, okay, you're assigned to this, it's not because you're assigned to me, even though I do more quantitative research and mixed methods, that you have to do this. You choose your path, and so I think that's a really important movement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, technology. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I mean, technology has. I mean, you guys came in the age of computers.
Yeah.
So it was before. So I mean, I remember, and telling the students, it was like you have a huge pad of paper like this.
We remember the days of the punch cards, right?
Oh, well, this is even before punch cards when you did everything by hand. And it was like a huge piece of paper, and you would just use the entire thing up by, doing calculations. And then I always remember punch paper before that, and then entire buildings that would house computers. So I think that I mean, even with qualitative, it's the technology that's available for that has changed how research is done. And I would say also technology is really starting to influence the kinds of studies that we can now do in terms of music, like especially in the neurosciences, and what's available for us to even discover. So the research is just not observational anymore, but now really moving into entirely different worlds. If we have the access to that technology.
And I would say also with technology beyond, software now available and fast computers available to us, for me it's seeing the potential of team science way across the world. You don't have to be, physically together. Although I must say on an NIH review a couple of years ago, we had a team of different people across the United States, and one of the NIH reviewers wrote, and we said we'll be meeting via Zoom and we'll be meeting, and the NIH reviewers were still, one of them was still critiquing that we were not in close proximity, that it's harder to do research that way, and it's like, man, that's clearly somebody who probably never used Skype or Zoom and doesn't know that it's much more now than just video, that you can share live documents, you can work together, you're not limited. And I find it very exciting. I just submitted an application, and it's with researchers from Norway, Germany, and Maryland, and it's just, you're not bound anymore by geographical location. That's opens up a whole new world for research possibilities and collaborations for us within the field of music therapy.
Yeah.
I'll respond differently.
Go.
It's still related, but I think I'd like to put it into the context of MAR. I'm just going to share my perspectives in a way that maybe Ilka and Jean wouldn't do, but I think it's important for the video. In terms of the development or what MAR has contributed, from my perspective, Jean's undergraduate program has been for decades engaging undergraduate students in research projects, and that's extremely unusual. And I don't know any other program in the country that's doing that at the level that she's doing it, and has been doing it, I think, in a way that that folks overall don't really understand. When her students come to these conferences and present at the poster session, they're really articulate and poised students presenting research at an undergraduate level, which I think is really fantastic, and that this has been going on for decades. Mm-hmm. And I think that needs to be remembered. Yoko's position, as best as I understand it, is one of the very first music therapy research positions in the country, and where her primary responsibilities are as a researcher. And this is another MAR thing, and that it's that I think that she really provides a model for the researcher music therapist in a way that very few other people are in the country. And this is so important, not just because of talking about what this gives for new career researchers like Clarissa, but it's that one of the things that I think are still working out as a field is infrastructure, especially research infrastructure, and models for folks to see what's possible as a research community. And I think that both Jean and Ilka said it really nicely, that and I wonder if it's a generational shift or it's just a natural kind of development, and that is that folks actually want to get along now and want to learn from each other rather than sort of siloing, and that a lot of that stuff was kind of worked out in our region. I mean, the qualitative research was primarily an NYU Temple thing in its earliest days, and those folks were really hardcore, like qualitative and quantitative kind of go jump, and I think that was partly to establish qualitative research as a legitimate field of inquiry, and we did that here in this region. That didn't really happen anywhere else. I mean, there were other folks doing qualitative research over on the West Coast especially, but a lot of that stuff happened here. And I think one of the outcomes of programs like Temple's, and I think now Drexel's as well, and NYU's I'm less familiar with currently, is that there's a shifting away from a particular kind of research perspective, which is methodological, to one which is much more integrative around a question. And that this is so important for us as a field, that this is where we are, and that a lot of the stuff is being driven in our region. A lot of this stuff around this is really happening.
And I think, jumping off of that and jumping into the research committee work, I actually brought these. So these are actually from some of the first symposium and research kinds of things, I think, pulling together in the region. I mean, people were presenting. So in 2005, actually, the first symposium, and I think it was the first symposium at a MAR conference also. And then from there, they started doing Wednesday symposiums. And it was on research in order to try to bring, quote, the groups together. And in fact, that's why I even designed this particular logo that I still keep throwing on. The things that we're doing, yeah. So as far as bringing research together, it was the idea of bringing both the quantitative and the qualitative people together. I remember I was assigned actually coming up with some kind of diagram about process that would put both of the concepts in and being able to present on that at this particular symposium. And then from there, we did these for a while until it just became, okay, we can drop this now, can't we? But we did these for a while in terms of what was presented, and it was soon after that that the research committee actually was formed. I'm trying to think. So it was Kathy Murphy, myself, Brian Abrams was on it originally, and
I was on it early on.
Originally, yeah.
And then I stepped down for a couple of years and then joined again in 2012.
Yep. Yeah. So, and then Tony, you came on, 2007? I've got you on the booklet.
I don't remember when I started.
Yeah, I got you on the booklet the first time in 2007. So, and then...
Then that must be it.
That must be it. So,
but I think it's interesting that we moved from just doing an symposium or an institute to then the research track like we have it now. And I think other regions have followed suit now, but for the longest time we were the only region with a research track at the conference and a true focus on research at the conference. And the past couple of years, how we focus really on the clinician. How can we get the clinician excited to contribute to research? It's so important. And then from there, we developed a collaborative research award to be added to the MAR Research Special Project Award that we've been having for a while. And that was, again, to bring a clinician together with maybe a more seasoned researcher. And then AMTA followed that model and is now offering the clinicians, what do they call it? The Clinicians Award or the Clinicians Research Award, but it's the same model. A clinician needs to partner with a scholar. And so I think we've often, you said, this was only happening in MAR, or this is really, we're mainly, but I think as with many other things, because we are a big region, we really have forged the path, I think, in some of these, bringing research to a higher level of importance, at conferences and really putting it in everybody's mind.
We're also and I can't remember when it actually started, but it was soon. I mean, we did the one symposium and then the research track started actually that would have been 2006 that they continued. But it was soon after that we started with the research poster session, actually doing short presentations of research. And now that also is what AMTA is doing too. And I think that's been a really valuable part to the research poster session. And it kind of ebbs and wanes as far as who's on it, but right now it's got this trend of moving to kind of more graduate, undergraduate research, and I'm finding more undergraduate research coming as proposals, which I think is really exciting as far as that. So yeah, from a number of perspectives, we've kind of led the role in terms of that. And I think even having a research committee at the region, there's always been a research representative that's gone from MAR, but it's never been part of an entire committee in other regions as much as it's been here also. So.
I want to respond to what you've said there about having the research track at the conference. When I started in the field, I was, it was 2007 or so as a master's student. And over the years, as I've seen that track become more and more integrated as something more mainstream as part of the conference, it was really encouraging to me as a clinician to see that my clinical work had relevance and was of interest to researchers, which I didn't necessarily know previously. So I was, so I just wanted to speak to how important that movement and that growth has been in encouraging clinicians to consider their work of value to the larger field so that we can all grow together in our profession.
Well, that kind of makes me think about, the future and MAR and research. Is there something about 2025 or something? Is there something coming up?
Well, one thing that I'll jump off what you said about the uniqueness of my position at Drexel, having a research position. What I would like to see in the future, and it's related to MTR 2025 because we have a section in there on research capacity building, and I really am hoping that a culture shift can happen at the level of university, in academia, where especially tenure track positions in music therapy are truly treated, especially at research and high research universities, are treated as research positions where faculty get at least some release time, consistent release time, to do research, so that we have more of our PhD scholars, when they graduate, move into positions where they know they'll be able to continue, to work on a systematic research program. And I'm not sure if it's going to happen anytime soon because our programs are predominantly housed within schools of music where we don't have that research culture. But if I'm looking even at a Temple, right, where fortunately I think it's shifting there a bit, but when I had my position at Drexel, I thought, why is it at Temple University where you have these tenure track research faculty positions, and these professors are teaching all these courses, yet their counterpart in the Department of Psychology, also with a tenure track, faculty position, gets much more time to do research. Mm-hmm. Why is it that somehow music therapy, faculty positions are not, tenure track positions are not given the same weight in terms of research? And so I think it's because of the location in schools of music, but that is an important shift that I would like to see happen. And I think that as faculty members that we really can encourage our students to think about when they accept positions, to really know that they can be in a position of negotiating that with a future employer. And so yesterday for the research track, I did a session on the path after the PhD, or the journey after the PhD. And I told people who were there, when you get your job offer, if you at that moment can negotiate for some release time and come to the negotiating table with numbers in your hand and say, okay, so I see that an FNA rate on your, at your university is 56%. So if I bring in a $200,000 grant, that's $100,000 for your university. right? And I said, if you come with numbers like that to the table, I think there's going to be more of a listening ear. I might be idealistic thinking so, but for sure with the overhead that you bring in, it can at least cover 3 credits of release time and potentially actually half of your position. And I think right now people are not negotiating always for that and are happy to have a position, and they may think, oh, down the line I will try to negotiate. But so I think that's an important shift that needs to happen in the future, because you have all these brilliant scholars coming out of these PhD programs, and then they just get bogged down with a lot of teaching and administrative responsibilities, and it's a shame. Am I too idealistic to think that will ever happen?
I don't know. That's a really. I was thinking about it. I think I wish it would. I think it's a really interesting question about PhD preparation. I think is that what most PhD music therapy folks are doing is going into teaching heavy institutions, and that they've had a really hard time establishing any kind of research agenda, and that there's more and more pressure on folks to teach and to run programs. And I think that that's fiscal. I think that the kinds of universities that most music therapy programs are housed in are going to go through a period of economic strain, I think, and because of falling numbers in institutions. And I don't know whether that's going to impact music therapy programs, but mid-sized institutions and small institutions, I think, in the next 10 years are going to be really stressed financially, or perhaps experience potential distress. And that I don't know what that's going to mean for our new PhD students. But what it says to me is that there's increased pressure on faculty to teach, and that there's less emphasis placed on research at the majority of those institutions because of financial, just fear, I think. It's driven by fear.
Well, it's interesting at and I know at Drexel we just have come out of a severe financial crisis, and we actually just yesterday received an email from our chief of finance, I guess, or whatever the title is, and so she summarized how we were able to get out, and the path forward is going to be mostly positive path forward is going to be possible by bringing in more research dollars, because that is a huge income for a university. On my NIH grant now, a university is getting $400,000 for them. You know, and
that's
so
50%.
That's 56%.
56.
Yeah.
So, I think, Tony, I think you're absolutely right, and I do think that it's more of an institution-specific question rather than, I don't think it's a big housing, music school, or music department question, because faculty in those places also do research or publication or creative scholarship, whatever you want to call it. But I do think you're very right about the institutional stress that we're going to be in for a while. But you also like, the notion of your in conference and workshops and so forth, talking to this next generation about negotiating at the front end of accepting a position, because that is where you have the most leverage, at least to the extent you have any leverage. That it's that point that it's a good one, and that there are things you could say to make that more appealing. I'd be a little careful about how much money we talk about people promising, because as you know, those grants are incredibly competitive, but it's there, but it's not a panacea. But I do think the notion of negotiating that as a part of your position is at least a place where people have some leverage at the outset. And in all honesty, I think most provosts, deans, and so forth, if they're interested in their new faculty at all, or interested in what is going to keep them and help them to feel productive and on those kinds of things. So at that juncture is a really good place to teach the next generation to do that.
I've got a related question actually that I wonder what Yoko and Jean you think about this, but this is really for everybody that I think in these institutions, what we're experiencing now is also increased pressure to get into the music and health thing that's happening, and that there are more and more institutions like orchestras and who are also experiencing financial distress, who are receiving funding to do music interventions in the community of one sort or another, or to be involved in music and health, and that often, I think it's often perceived as being, why isn't there a music therapist, or it's in competition to music therapy, and so that there is at the moment this kind of cultural shift in that music and something is healthy about music. But I don't know that we are harnessing it as a music therapy community, or we are at least experiencing lots of other people moving into the music and health, and what impact that has on how we would think about research.
I think in terms of a research response to that, I always get a bit annoyed when people get very defensive about musicians coming to hospitals, and I feel a defensive response is not a productive response, and that we, as you said yesterday, we're late in the game, but there should have been already, and at least moving forward, there needs to be a much more proactive research response, and to make sure that as music therapists, the research that we're doing really is looking at unique aspects of music therapy. So we can do a research study about the use of live music in a hospital setting, for example, or we can do a research study looking at, for example, comparing the effects of, or even patients' perception of live music by a musician versus when live music is brought by a music therapist, and there's an interactive component. So I think if we look at the research that has been done, so often I think, oh, why are we doing this research? Why are we not doing research that really gives us more evidence and more, I guess evidence about some of the unique aspects of music therapy, about the intervention, and that, so that when somebody asks, well, why do we need a music therapist? We have great musicians from the Philadelphia Orchestra coming in, and their patients love them, that we can really say, yeah, that's important, but here's what a music therapist can bring. And right now we're often kind of stuck just talking.
Being defensive.
Exactly, and just talking about it. Well, if we can say, well, here's some research that,
Well, what do you all think of looking at potential harm in music, and how if you look at harm, then you can justify why you would have a music therapist versus just a musician? What do you all think about looking into
So
that?
my response, a hospital administrator, would be, well, show me the research that you're not conducting harm. Mm-hmm. We have nothing in our almost nothing in our field about harm, and many music therapists are doing harm as well, I must say. I'm sure. I mean, I hope not, but I think it happens. And I'm not saying, so again, I think we as music therapists understand, no, we're trained not to do harm. We're trained to use music responsibly. But as a hospital administrator, I want to see more than your lip service to that.
Yes.
No, I was just, I remember I was going back to one of your ideas for a perspective journal. Is that what you were going to?
No, please talk about that.
Yeah, was actually to do a whole journal on music harm, and it was met with great resistance.
Really?
Well, when we first, I'll let Jean finish.
Yeah, and I think it still hasn't kind of come to play. As far as that, I think at that time, at least, the group was hesitant about how people would perceive it, and whether it would even cause problems and have a negative effect. despite discussions. So I think there is some things happening in Europe. And I'm trying to think, just when I was over in the Netherlands about harm, Maureen is looking at, she's actually writing a book with some people on looking at music harm and negative effects. So it's coming, but I think, the discussion is, people are really hesitant, but, so, sorry.
No, not at all. The MAR Research Committee just funded, to the best of my knowledge, the first study of harm. So there's currently a graduate student is actually interviewing music therapists about their practice and about harmful experiences and what they see as the potential for harm in their practice.
Yeah.
And so that's happening right at the moment. That's a MAR funded award for graduate research. So we talked, the editors of MTP and JMT and the editorial boards talked about doing a joint issue across both journals around harm. And we actually tried to do that at the end of our terms as in the last year as editors. And we just logistically weren't able to get it together to actually do that. And partly it's because nobody's doing any research. And it's a matter of pulling things from disparate sources to try to get some kind of perspective. And so at the end we ended up letting it go because it was not constructed strongly enough to actually be ready for publication, to move into publication. But there are lots of folks who are this is really in folks' consciousness at the moment.
Yeah.
And even though, so I did one study comparing listening to music versus interactive music making with a music therapist with cancer patients, and that was published in Supportive Care in Cancer. And we had made some careful conclusions in the past that it seemed like from the findings that a music therapist, we didn't even say that music therapists should be employed. We made a very careful statement saying something like, because this was a very small study, that it might be a good idea to employ a music therapist when working with cancer patients or in hospitals. And the reviewers themselves said these findings are quite convincing that when using music with a vulnerable population like this, it should be done with a music therapist or in consultation with a music therapist. So we would like you to make your recommendation or conclusions stronger. And we were like, okay. So it was the reviewers who asked us to make, so if you can do that also, even though the study itself was not about harm, but the qualitative findings showed where, patients said things like, oh, the music at times evoked really strong feelings in me when I was just with the iPod. I didn't have anybody to talk to, so I really preferred it when I was with a music therapist and we could. So that's other ways to show, and then when you know of those publications, that when you get confronted with a question on a hospital administrator or the university, why, if we can gather some of those publications, because I'm sure that other music therapists have made similar recommendations in their publications, I think that's also good material to have.
And to piggyback on that article, because I just read it for another class, I wanted to say how impressive it was that you had broken it down into different typologies of types of what people prefer about the music experience, because some of them were clearly more interested in having a more receptive aesthetic internal experience, and for those folks it may have been more helpful for them to have the music medicine intervention instead of music therapy intervention. But I appreciated so much how you gave equal value to music medicine and music therapy based on the type of person who was receiving the intervention. So
I think what, in addition to the interactive part, I think I also would really like to see if there's any way for us to be much more a part also of all the new trends in neuroscience and become more on board with research there's all this research that's being done on music and the brain, but we're not a part of any of that. in any way. And what we're learning now about music in the brain and how it even justifies things that we've been talking about for years as the phenomena of music, and now have actually research to support what is actually happening.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm jumping on the bandwagon.
Good deal.
So we
Good
just
deal.
submitted a NIH grant in response to the music and health calls that came out by NIH. And I am collaborating with Stefan Kölsch, who is a leading music neuroscientist, to do fMRI research on the brain of people with chronic pain, to look what's happening in the reward circuitry when they're listening to music, because that is of great importance to pain management. And so it's a two-phase study where we just, first is a pure basic science lab study, but then it moves into a clinical study where people with chronic pain will actually be in a month treatment program and then come back to the scanner. So I think, some people are jumping
Oh, yeah.
or are
Yeah, yes.
really exploring that, and that's exactly what this call of the NIH and the whole music and health strategic recommendations that came out of a work group 3 years ago, the purpose of that was really to bring music neuroscientists together with music therapists and have the two fields work together. And actually, I think it happens both ways. Stefan Kölsch, for example, he does a really nice job at the end of some of his articles. He'll make recommendations to music therapists. Actually, one of his reviews has a little box at the end, and it's basically a message to music therapists. And he basically says, okay, I did all this work, and I know that the brain does this and this and this in response to music. Now we need to look at how that is relevant to your clinical work, or how this can inform your clinical work, or how. And so he is dying to work with music therapists to give the clinical meaning to the basic science that they're doing. And that's really exciting.
I apologize, I've got to go run and take care of some arrangements for our student lunch. If I don't, I'll be very unpopular with my students. I had one other quick thought to go back for a second about teaching the next generation of faculty coming in, that whole negotiating piece. There are, I don't know how widespread a trend this is, but there certainly is a trend among some undergraduate institutions to do and engage undergraduates more in research, and I just happen to think that is another part that's tied to that negotiating piece. If that happens to be a school like that you're applying to, say, I really can know how to do this, but I got to have some space in my teaching role to engage them.
Yeah.
And that is a real thing. I mean, that's a real deal.
That's a good one. I actually have it on that slide like different things, like the money is only one, but another one I think is just visibility and status building. I mean, every provost wants to hear that,
Right.
But that's a good one.
Yeah, because that
really
is a
good one.
real thing amongst some portion. I don't know how big it is. It's certainly true at Nazareth and some other schools that we are in a consortium with. So that's, I think, a really strong possibility there. And then before I leave, I have a Stump the Panel trivia quiz. A question for the panel. A Stump the Panel trivia piece. And that is, when this is a historical MAMTA question, when MAMTA was founded in 1950 by Ray Green and the group from MTNA, they wrote bylaws and constitution, and they formed the only committee they designated at that time was a single committee. Do you all know what that committee was?
It must have been a research.
It must have been.
Is it a prize? Is it a prize? Can I come get pizza?
You can come get pizza. Yes, you absolutely can come get pizza. But that's part one of the question. Part two is, who was the first chair of that research committee?
It couldn't have been you, right?
Oh, Lord.
Just kidding.
I probably deserve that.
Was it the
I no longer
guy
get
from
pizza.
Was his first initials E.T.?
No. It
wasn't Gaston.
It was not Gaston.
No, it wasn't Sears, no.
It was not Sears.
Who was it then?
A woman.
It's not a woman, so.
Yeah, no, not that guy.
It's a name quite familiar to us at the current time, though, in our current time.
Oh,
Ray?
from FSU.
No.
Oh.
It was Arthur Flagler Foltz.
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
For whom the Foltz Award is named.
Oh.
He was the
first chair.
He was the first chair of the research committee. Yeah. And that's why the Otts, one of the reasons the Otts chose to name the Folds Fund after him.
Wow, that's some good
And all of that
Yeah.
took place in a hotel room.
In New York City.
Yep, yeah.
Wow.
In what time period?
1950. It was
Yeah.
June 2nd,
Well,
1950.
actually, didn't they start, they started actually even the year before talking about it?
They started talking about it the year before.
Yeah.
But the committee met, yeah.
Right, and then it
And then the
formed.
first conference, the first MAR-AMTA conference was actually in December in conjunction with the
Right.
MTNA conference.
Yeah, it took place at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there you go.
No.
Sorry, I had to-
Go get your lunch ready.
Planning that question for a while.
No, I thought, as I was sitting here, I thought, oh, here's the piece of trivia we got to get on the record, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you all.
See you.
We're actually at our time, unfortunately. So does anybody have any closing comments or?
Just
Because I've got about 12 questions. that I
Thank
still
you for
have to
being
ask.
here and sharing your experiences and your.
Well, actually,
wisdom with us.
I'd like to thank the two of these because they're actually also fantastic mentors. And to me, research is this kind of layer of an onion that you just keep kind of pulling back and learning. I think it's absolutely fantastic working with these two, and they've contributed so much to, I think, the research committee and how it got formed and what it's done at the conferences for everybody. So a huge thank you to both of them.
And thank you for your, how many years of service now on the?
From the beginning.
Since the beginning. She's the only one who hasn't stopped yet.
All of the years. All of the years.
How many years is it, Jane?
2005.
And I'll also just say that new researchers know that we would be nowhere without you. So thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, everyone.